Preface of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgoyne. Preface. These lessons were issued to a few of my pupils as private studies in occultism several years ago. The time has now come to give them to the world as a companion to the first volume of The Light of Egypt. It is the duty of occult students to familiarize themselves with the subjects herein discussed. They should know the ideas of our ancestors regarding them and be familiar with their thought, in order to appreciate the sublime wisdom and knowledge of nature as taught by them. Otherwise, we are sure to do them, as well as ourselves, great injustice. The history of occultism bears out the fact that there is very little that is new to the present time. The arrangement and classification of thought differs during each cycle of time on the different spirals, and, like the fruitage on lower rounds of nature's progressive wheel of destiny, variety and quality are diverse, so likewise do we find the mental manifestations. This age, however, is blessed with a great variety and abundance of thought in clear-cut language that should enlighten the races of the earth with Mother Nature's modus operandi in every department of human thought. We hope these chapters will aid to this end, and doubtless many students will find in them the key to unlock the mysteries veiled in symbol and hieroglyphic by ancient writers. The author's object has been to make plain and easy of understanding these subjects. Much, however, has been left for private study and research, for many large volumes might be filled if a detailed description of each subject were entered upon, which task is left for those who feel so inclined. A rich reward is in store for those spiritual investigators who will follow out the paths and lines herein mapped out on spiritual astrology, alchemy, and other subjects. Meditation and aspiration will open up hidden treasures that will prove a boon to occult students, for astrology and alchemy are the two grand sciences that explain the why and reasons for what we see and experience on every plane of life. In this age, there should be no concealing of these divine truths. We cannot hide anything in the air, and for this reason, the sun in Aquarius will unearth and reveal to man all that the present cycle has to give during the sun's passage through this airy sign. The watery sign, Pisces, through which the sun manifested during the past 2,160 years, gave up to man their secret powers and hidden attributes in steam as a motive power, which man has completely mastered. He will likewise master the airy forces during the present subcycle of the sun in Aquarius. Already we see him using liquid air and compressed air as a motive power, which will gradually take the place of steam as the sun gets farther into the sign or constellation of Aquarius. Men will become immensely wiser than they have been, and it is to be hoped they will leave the written record of their achievements in science and art to show to future races their status of mind on every subject, for the edification and enlightenment of coming races. Our ancestors were denied this great privilege. Consequently, their wisdom is only symbolized to us in a way that it is difficult to read and interpret correctly. Yet, we who have the key to their symbols can read accurately the truth they wish to convey, which stands out clearly to all capable of understanding and interpreting symbolism and correspondence correctly. History and nature repeat themselves in every cycle of time. Therefore, these forces and potentialities are natural to the sign through which the sun manifests. We can go backward or forward through the sun's zodiac and read correctly the history of the horary past, as well as the present and future, by bearing in mind the sign and cycle in manifestation at any given period. When the proper time arrives, a work will be given to the world to prove to mankind the law of cycles. God is present in all ages and races, manifesting His love and wisdom throughout infinite creations, and that He records, in His own way, the most detailed record of any event which takes place, thus giving to man a complete history of His works and will, for man's enlightenment, so that he, too, may cooperate intelligently with his God in every way that intelligent wills to manifest. Prehistoric history is not blotted out from nature's laboratory. The astral book of karmic evolution will one day reveal its hidden treasures to a waiting world in such a manner as to surprise and enlighten mankind, as the recording angels give up those gems of truth they have so jealously guarded for untold cycles of time, simply because the time was not ripe for its divulgence. There is a time for everything, and when that time arrives, all past history of our planet's evolution will be written in an intelligent manner for the illumination and education of man as the masterpiece of the living God. In this way, man will worship deity and perfect his God nature, even to angelhood. If this volume of The Light of Egypt meets with the same appreciation that was accorded the first volume, which has passed through 4 editions and is still growing in favor every day, besides being translated into the French, the author will feel that his efforts have not been wasted, and he trusts the race will have been made better for having read his writings. As this is his posthumous contribution to the world, the author wishes in this connection to pay a debt of gratitude and grateful recognition to his esteemed pupil and friend, Dr. Henry Wagner, who has so generously published nearly all of his writings. Without his aid and assistance, we would not have been able of ourselves to have given these works to the world. Therefore, honor to whom honor is due. Mrs. Bell M. Wagner has been chosen by the Masters as my spiritual successor and representative of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and thus perpetuate the chain of outward connection between those in the realm of the higher life with those upon the outward plane. She is our choice and a most worthy one to take my place. I make this statement in this connection for the benefit of my pupils and Hermetic students generally, as I am being personated by frauds and impostors, claiming to be Zanoni, Verbam, Sap. It is my request that a facsimile of my signature and symbol accompany this preface. Dictated by the author from the subjective plane of life, to which he ascended several years ago, through the law of mental transfer, well known to all occultists, he is enabled again to speak with those who are still upon the objective plane of life. The editions found in this volume, not in the original manuscripts, have been supplied in this manner. The 2 planes of life, the objective and subjective, are scientific facts, no longer disputed by well-informed minds, and the exchange of thought will become almost universal among educated minds during the present cycle. Hence, great progress will come to the earth during the next 2,160 years, while the sun manifests his glorious influence through the symbol of the man. Thanking each and all who have aided in any way to give my writings to the world, I am, in love and fraternal greetings, ever yours, Omnia Vincent Veritas. End of the preface. Section 1. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgoyne. Volume 2, Introduction. What study is more sublime, inspiring, and profitable in the highest sense than the language of the stars? Those silent monitors of the midnight sky, who reveal His will as secondary causes in the administration of universal law. The science of the stars is the divine parent of all science. The more earnest our study, the more recondite our research and thorough our investigation of the science of the stars, the more fully shall we realize the truth of the teacher's words. Astrology is the key that opens the doors to all occult knowledge. It is the key that unlocks the mysteries of man's being, his why, whence, whither. Within the temple of Urania lies concealed the mystery of life. The indices are there, written by the finger of the infinite in the heavens above. It is our privilege to make this language our own, and it should be the earnest work of every true student of nature to acquire a right understanding and correct interpretation of these divine symbols. And as thorough students of any language seek out the derivation of words and expressions, search for the root or stem word and its origin, so should the student of astrology, by sincere desire and earnest study, seek to know the origin and root of these starry words and complex expressions of the language of the stars. The sun, moon, and 5 planets of our solar system are to us symbols of the reflected and refracted rays of the triune attributes of the great central spiritual sun, life, light, and love, analogous to the 3 primary colors in nature, which become still further refracted into 4 secondary or complementary colors, rays, or attributes, the 7 constituting the active principles of nature, the 7 rays of the solar spectrum, the 7 notes of a perfect musical scale, there being throughout a perfect correspondence, and all are but different modes of vibration or activities of the Supreme Intelligence. And as we know, the 7 rays of color reflect an almost infinite variety of tints, that octave upon octave are built upon the 7 natural tones in music. So also are these 7 active principles divided and subdivided into innumerable forms, qualities, and manifestations of the first trinity: life, light, love. Life being the manifestation of the second 2, love and wisdom, which in turn are the dual expressions of the one. Upon the knowledge of these divine truths, Pythagoras built the theory of the music of the spheres. Let us pause and listen to this celestial music. Suns and their systems of planets sound forth the deep bass tones and rich tenor, while angelic races take the silvery treble of the divine melody, octave upon octave, by more and ever more ethereal system upon system, to the very throne of deity, the infinite, eternal source of light, life, and love. Let us learn through the knowledge of the stars to attune our souls to vibrate to the divine harmony, so that we may take our places in the celestial choir and blend our voices with those of the celestial singers, chanting the divine anthem, "We praise thee, O God." To resume, if we would gain a correct knowledge of astral science, we should study astrology in its universal application, side by side with its more intricate phase and the details as manifested upon the individual man and his material destiny. Let us digress for a moment. The intellectual minds, the material scientists who cavil at the science of the stars, declaring it to be mere fortune-telling, consequently false, do but air their ignorance of this most profound subject, not knowing that it embraces and contains all sciences, all religions that have ever been or ever will be, comprises all history of every age, of races, empires, and nations, that it is the only true chronology, and marks the destiny not only of personal man on every plane, but of the human family as a whole. All mythologies find their explanation in this starry language, and every religion is founded upon the movements of our solar system. The rise and fall of empires and races of men are written in its pages. To master as far as we are capable and our limited space of life here will permit, We must pursue the study in its broad sense, as already stated, in the external application of the starry influx, and upon the interior planes of action from God to the mineral to man, I, and man to the angel, finding in every section a complete and perfect correspondence. To master the alphabet should be the first step, whose vowels, diphthongs, and consonants are the planets and shining zodiac. It is very essential to clearly comprehend the action and reaction of the planets upon the human organism as an integral part of the universal organism, ever remembering that the starry vowels, in combination with the consonants or zodiac, form the infinite expressions comprising the language of the starry heavens in their threefold manifestation upon the external planes of life, while the radiant constellations are the ideas which find expression through this language, which is likewise a science, accurate in its mathematical construction and perfect in geometric proportion. The student should ever bear in mind that astrology, like every other science, is progressive. The underlying principles are always the same. These are like the laws of the Medes and Persians, but the plane of action is constantly changing. It is a well-established and indisputable truth that from the sun, the solar center of our system, is derived all force, every power and variety of phenomena that manifests itself upon Mother Earth. Therefore, when we remember that the solar parent passes through one sign of his celestial zodiac in 2,160 years, a 12th part of his orbit of 25,920 years, we see that from each sign in turn, he, the sun, raise forth an influx peculiar to that special sign. And as there are no two signs alike in nature or quality, hence the passage of the sun from one sign into another causes a change of polarity in planetary action, which can be fully demonstrated and conclusively proven. It follows as a natural sequence that the rules formulated and taught by astrologers in reference to the plane of planetary influence in one subcycle will not hold good in the next. To illustrate, in the year 1881, the sun passed from the sign Pisces into Aquarius, thus beginning a new cycle of solar force. The human race has entered upon a cycle in every respect differing in nature and action from the past cycle of 2,160 years. The sign Aquarius is masculine, electric, positive. It is intellectual in character, scientific, philosophic, artistic, intuitive, and metaphysical. It is the sign of the man. The truths of the past are becoming etherealized. Our solar parent has scarcely crossed the threshold of the sign Aquarius, and already we observe in many directions the activities of the peculiar influx. True, it is but the first flush of the dawn of a new era, the harbinger of a glorious day to our race. In the light of this truth, ponder well on the nature of the influx radiating from the solar center, each orb of his shining family absorbing a different ray or attribute of solar energy, corresponding to its own peculiar nature. The Earth, in her annual passage about her solar parent, receives the harmonious or discordant vibrations of this astral influx according to the many angles she forms to the various planets. We see, then, that the Earth is enveloped in an atmosphere or zone of occult force we recognize as humane, mental, positive, etc., acting and reacting upon the human family through the laws of vibration in strict and exact ratio to its interior capacity to receive and ability to externalize upon the material plane of being. The results, as far as this stage of existence goes, will be manifest as man vibrates harmoniously or otherwise to the stellar cause. The present subcycle, producing an entirely different influence to that of the past cycle, whose force was watery, magnetic, and feminine, causes a wearing of elements, confusion, and uncertainty, until the old are displaced by the new conditions. We should learn from these facts that it is folly to brand as false and condemn as worthless the rules and formulas, and even religious thought of the past, when we find upon careful investigation and crucial tests their inadequacy to account for present conditions. They were true in their cycle, and applied to past conditions and states of mental development, but in this new era upon whose threshold we now stand, the vibrations become more intense. Man's whole nature is being tuned to a higher key. We must not forget that these cycles apply to the race in their effect and to the individual only as an integral part of the whole. To illustrate, the sign Aquarius is an electrical, positive, masculine influence, and will, consequently, manifest its chief activities upon the masculine qualities of the human soul, and today we have evidence of this in the gradual enfranchisement of women, arousing the positive attributes of her nature and demanding equal rights with her brother, man, in the political arena, as she has already done in the educational field. The masculine portion of the race is becoming more aggressive, mentally, asserting greater individuality, independent thought and action. The intellect of the race is being directed, however, slowly into scientific channels, while the human soul is slowly awakening to a sense of a deathless immortality and a desire for spiritual truth. It is slowly but surely shaking off the yoke of an effete priesthood and the fetters of superstition and tyranny. Intelligent man talks of the new scientific and intellectual era that has dawned upon the world, of the necessity for a new religious system based upon scientific truths which can be demonstrated, combined with the pure spiritual essence found in all systems of religion, a religion with more spirituality and less theology, a broader charity and less dogma, and deeper love for God and man, its only creed. We must now consider the astral influence of the cycle upon the physical organism of mankind, and particularity. Intelligent man talks of the new scientific and intellectual era that has dawned upon the world, of the necessity for a new religious system based upon scientific truths which can be demonstrated, combined with the pure spiritual essence found in all systems of religion, a religion with more spirituality and less theology, a broader charity and less dogma, and deeper love for God and man, its only creed. We must now consider the astral influence of the cycle upon the physical organism of mankind, and particularly of the Western races, who are moving upon the upward arc of the cycle. It is quite evident that a radical change must take place in the physical form and constitution with the influx of more intellectual, ethereal, and spiritual vibrations. The organism must become more refined and compact. A greater degree of sensitiveness be attained with a highly nervous system. The forerunner of this superior organism is now apparent in the numerous schools of physical culture and gymnasiums throughout the land. The many articles and pamphlets on deep rhythmic breathing disseminated among the people, and last but not least, the various schools of mental healing, etc. The masses look on and wonder while they exclaim, "What marvelous changes are coming to the world!" but are utterly ignorant of the cause of the mysterious change. To the student of Hermetic philosophy, there is no mystery involved. He knows the cause and confidentially watches for the effect. Each one must seek to comprehend for himself, according to the light he may receive, basing his premises upon the true principles of astrology, carefully noting the triune aspect of planetary influence upon humanity, ever remembering that the sun and moon are the great factors in human destiny, and that his premises and conclusions must occupy the same plane. Having acquired a knowledge of the science in its application to the individual, take the broader field or universal aspect as it applies to human race, and you will find the rise and fall of nations, empires, and families marked upon the celestial dial, and in perfect accord with the influence of the sun and planets upon Mother Earth in her various movements. And last, but most important, seek with an earnest desire for truth to learn the relation of those glittering constellations of the shining zodiac to the human soul and their influence in shaping its eternal destiny. This will reveal the whole of involution and evolution in a general sense. A faithful, earnest, and devout study of the science of the starry heavens will lead us on to other planes of thought, relating to still more interior realms of knowledge than we perhaps now dream of, and in the words of the Master, a true knowledge of the stars will include a true knowledge of the soul, and we shall realize the mystical link that binds the soul to the stars. Minnie Higgin. End of Section 1. Section 2 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgoyne. Chapter 1. The Zodiac. To the ordinary astrologer, the zodiac is simply a band of space, 18 degrees wide, in the heavens, the center of which marks out the pathway of the sun during the space of 1 year of 365 days. The 12 signs are to him simply 30 degrees of the space. 12 times 30 equals 360, bearing the names of the constellations which once occupied them. Nay, he, as a rule, still imagines in some sense that the signs, constellations, are still there, and that the power and potency of the 12 signs is derived from the stars which occupy the zodiacal band of the skies. But this is not so, as any ordinary astronomer well knows. This single fact, i.e., the gradual shifting of the constellations, the displacement, let us say, of the starry influx from one sign to another, without any allowance being made in the astrologer's rules for any such change, has been one of the greatest obstructions to the popular spread of the art among educated minds. Argues the scientist, the fiery influence of Aries, if depending upon the stars of that constellation, ought now to be shedding forth their caloric from the sign Pisces, and Aries ought to be lumbering along with the earthy taurine nature. So also the lords of these signs ought to be changed. But that they are not can be proved by the fact that our earliest records of that dim, historic past show, equally as well as your latest textbook, that Mars is the lord of Aries, a fiery planet in a fiery sign. But astrologers still say that Pisces is watery and Aries fiery, which is not the case if the stars have any influence at all. It is not necessary, say these logical thinkers, to learn your abstruse science if we can demonstrate that the very basis upon which your conclusions rest is in every sense fundamentally false. The scientific facts of the case are as follows. The influence of the 12 signs as described by astrologers is a delusion, because in all ages they are reported the same, whereas we know that every 2,160 years each sign retrogrades to the extent of 30 degrees, and as your art does not make allowance for this, it is false. For if the influence of the 12 signs does not emanate from the stars occupying the space of those signs, it must emanate from nothing, a doctrine well suited, no doubt, to musty old sages of your superstitious Chaldea, but quite out of court in our progressive age, the last decade of our cultured and scientific 19th century. So far, so good. And so the world rolls along its bright pathway in the heavens, little heeding the logical conclusions of an exact science. But to an initiate of those inner principles of our planet's constitution, all these mental conflicts have a meaning and a purpose within nature's divine economy. For it is neither wise nor expedient that the masses, with popular science in the lead, should grasp the truths which Mother Nature reserves alone for her own devoted priests. The shining zodiac, with its myriad constellations and its perfect galaxy of starry systems, derives its subtle influence, as impressed astrologically upon the human constitution, from the solar center of our solar system, not from the stars which occupy the 12 mansions of space. Aries, the fiery, and Pisces, the watery, are always there, and instead of its being an argument against astrology, it is one of its grandest truths that in all ages and in all times, Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, has been found ever the same, equally as well as Pisces, the last. In order to convey our meaning, let us digress for a moment and bring forth a fitting illustration. The condition of our atmosphere and the surrounding objects, vegetation, etc., have a peculiar condition and a magnetism wholly their own when surveyed exactly at sunrise. There is a freshness and peculiar sense of buoyancy not visible at any other time. If this state could be registered by any instrument and compared with any other set periods during the day, it would offer a remarkable contrast. 2 hours later there is a very different influence, and at noon there is a wonderful contrast. The same may be said of sunset, and again at midnight, and lastly, note the difference 2 hours before dawn. This is the coolest period of the whole 24 hours. These are facts, and yet our hearts are all beating to the same life flow, and the earth is no farther away from the parent sun, and yet it is the angle at which we, the inhabitants, receive this sun's light that makes all the difference between dawn and sunset, noon and midnight. When to these facts it is further added that it is sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight at the same instant all the time, to some of the various different portions of the globe, it demonstrates most conclusively that the earth itself is enveloped, so to say, in a complete circle of conditions very similar to the 12 signs of the celestial zodiac. If we apply the foregoing illustration to the 12 signs of the zodiac, we shall see a perfect analogy. We shall find that when the sun reaches the celestial equator, so that it is equal day and equal night on the earth, that he is on the line of the celestial horizon. It is cosmic sunrise. Hence Aries, the fiery Azoth, begins his active influx and extends for 30 degrees, equal to 2 hours of the natural day. It is the fiery red streams of awakening life that we all manifest at sunrise. Then comes a change of magnetic polarity after the first fiery flush of cosmic life, the gleeful chattering of the birds and the crackling of the poultry. A reaction is noted. All things before active become restful and quiet. So it is with vegetation, so it is with infant life, and so it is with cosmic conditions. This corresponds with the sign Taurus. It is the solar influx, 30 degrees removed from his point of equilibrium toward the north. As this sign represents the powers of absorption, we see that as this period, vegetable and animal life is quietly absorbing, for its own use, the fiery streams of solar life. Again, we view the activity of solar influx from a different angle and change of polarity, and all things become active. It is executive force. This corresponds to the sign Gemini. It is the solar influx, 60 degrees removed from his point of equilibrium. Then comes another change of magnetic polarity. It is rest from labor. It is noon. This corresponds to Cancer. The analogy is perfect. It is the solar influx, 90 degrees removed from his point of equilibrium toward the north, and the highest point in the arc of his apparent journey and of cosmic life. It is the equilibrium of life forces. Again, the fiery influx begins its activity, and as the hardest part of the day is about 2 hours after noon or middle of the day, so is solar influx most potent at this point in the zodiac. This corresponds to the sign Leo. It is the solar influx, removed 100 degrees from his point of equilibrium and 30 degrees toward the south, and so on month after month until the last one, Pisces, which well corresponds to the watery skies of February and the lifeless period 2 hours before dawn of a new day upon the earth, a new year to man, and a new cycle in the starry heavens. The zodiac, then, as it applies to the human constitution and the science of astrology, has its foundation in the sun, the center and source of life to the planet, and the 12 signs of the 12 great spaces of our Earth's annual orbit about her solar parent, each one typical of its month, and each month typical of its corresponding action upon our earthly conditions. As each sunrise is different in its aspects, so are no two signs of the zodiac alike. The sunrise on the 1st of March is wholly different from the sunrise upon the 1st of May. So is the beginning and ending of each sign, and the beginning and ending of each natural day, peculiar unto itself. When we reflect upon the inner laws of this action and interaction, we come nearer and nearer to the one great occult fact, viz., the divine oneness of life. We find a perfect analogy between the destiny, the life and expression of life on the earth, and the life and material destiny of embodied man. He, too, has his sunrise, the beginning of a new day of life, the seed time, the flowering season, when life wears a roseate hue, the ripening fruits of experience, his harvest time. It may be tares or golden grain, his gradual decay, the ebbing of the life forces and the icy winter of death, his gentle zephyrs and destructive hurricanes, floods and tempests, periods of drought and plenty. Within his truant constitution, there are spring tides and low tides of physical, intellectual, and spiritual forces. Man also makes the annual journey about the solar center when, at the beginning of each new year to him, the life forces of his soul are renewed, regalvanized, so to say, according to the magnetic polarity of his constitution. And so every form of life has its zodiac, its orbit of life and destiny. It may be infinitesimal or vast beyond conception, each in its own peculiar plane. So we see that the whole visible universe is one vast organism, the medium of expression for the invisible, real universe, the soul and God, the great central sun, the eternal center of all life, binding the whole into unity, one life. The celestial signs of the shining zodiac have no existence to us apart from the graceful and unwearying motion of our Mother Earth. She alone makes our season, years, and destiny. And she alone, by her motion about the sun, determines the thrones and mansions of the planetary powers. The astrological zodiac of a Saturn or a Mars cannot be like ours. Their years and seasons are peculiar to themselves and their material conditions. Hence, the 12 constellations have no existence as objective facts of concrete formation or cosmic potentiality. No, but as unalterable symbols of occult truth. The starry pictures of the shining constellations have an eternal verity. They pertain to the living realities of the human soul and its varied experience. What the mysteries are and what connection they have with the 12 constellations will form the subject of our next chapter. End of Section 2. Section 3 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgoyne. Chapter 2. The Constellations. The 12 great constellations of the zodiacal belt, which forms the Earth's orbit and the sun's shining pathway around the celestial universe, have been considered as mere imaginary figures or emblems invented by an early primitive people to distinguish the monthly progress of the sun and mark out, in a convenient manner, the 12 great divisions or spaces of the solar year. To this end, it is thought, the various star groups, termed constellations, were fancifully imagined to represent the various physical aspects of the month under or into which they were consecrated by the sun's passage during the annual journey, so that in some sense the 12 signs or constellations were symbolical not only of the seasons but also of the labors of the year. That such a system seems perfectly natural to the learned mythologist and that granting the ancients so much is a very great concession toward this childish knowledge is, of course, quite excusable when we are constantly told or reminded that actual science, that is to say, exact science, does not date backward more than a couple of centuries at most. Even the modern astrologer must, as be descants upon the influence of the 12 signs, has but little, if any, real knowledge of this matter, above and beyond the purely physical symbolism above mentioned. And perhaps it is as well that such benighted condition prevails, and that the divine heavenly goddess is unsought and comparatively unknown. The celestial Urania, at least in such isolation, remains pure and undefiled. She is free from the desecrating influence of polluted minds. Such, in brief outline, is the general conception of mankind regarding the shining constellations that bedeck, like fiery jewels, their maker's crown, and illumine with their celestial splendor the wondrous canopy of our midnight skies. Is there no more than a symbol of rural work in the bright radiance of the starry Andromeda, the harbinger of gentle spring? Nothing, think you, but the fruit harvest and the vintage is in the fiery, flushing luster of Antares and the ominous Scorpion. Are men so spiritually blind that they can perceive nothing but the symbol of maturing vegetation and the long summer's day in the glorious splendor of Castor and his starry mate and brother, Pollux? It would indeed seem so dead is the heart and callous the spiritual understanding of our own benighted day. To the initiate of Uranus mysteries, however, these dead symbolic pictures become endowed with life. These emblems of rural labor or rustic art transform themselves from the hard chrysalistic shell and expand into the fully developed spiritual flowers of spiritual entities, revealing in their bright, radiating lines the awful mystery of the soul's genesis, its evolution, and eternal progressive destiny amid the mighty, inconceivable creations yet to come, pointing out each step and cycle in the soul's involution from its differentiation as a pure spiritual entity, a ray of divine intelligence, to the crystallization of its spiritual forces in the realms of matter and its evolution of progressive life, the same eternal symbols of the springtime, the glorious summer, the autumn and winter of its eternal being. In making this attempt, probably the very first within the era, to convey in plain and undisguised terms the interior mysteries of the 12 constellations, the reader and student is advised to ponder deeply upon the outlines presented. The subject is too vast to present in 1 or 2 chapters. Therefore, we hope that this revolution may incite the student to further research. The real significance, the true spiritual importance of such mysteries can only be realized and fully appreciated after prolonged meditation and careful study. With this brief digression, which we consider needed advice, we will resume our task and attempt to usher our student into the weird labyrinth of Solomon's starry temple, the house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. 1. Aries. First, Aries in his golden wool. This constellation represents the first divine idea, the word of the Kabbalist, and the first active manifestation of the glorious In Sof. In other words, it is mind in action, the first pulsation of deity in the dual aspects of Lord and Creator. To the human soul, it is and always typifies the unknown, invisible power, which we term intelligence, that which knows and gives unto each deific atom of life that distinguishing, universal, yet deathless force, which not only constitutes its spiritual identity and physical individuality, but enables it to pronounce in the presence of its Creator those mystic words, I am that I am. In other words, this beautiful constellation symbolizes the first pulsation of that ray of pure intelligence which constitutes the divine ego of the human soul. It is the first that impels ever onward the life atom in its evolutionary progress, and reveals to us the beginning or first manifestation of the divine ego as an active, self-existing atom of infinite spirit within angelic spheres. Seeing the actual spiritual reality symbolized in Aries, how easy it is to note its full significance upon the external plane when refracted and reflected into the planes below through the complex action of the human organism, conveying the same radical influx in the first astrological month and the first sign of the zodiac. We can read a perfect parallel in the astral influx upon the human body, as set forth in The Light of Egypt, Volume 1, which says, Aries symbolizes the sacrifice and represents the springtime, the beginning of a new year. The first action of pure intelligence brought forth the first expression of form, and led to the sacrifice of its angelic state, and, having gained the victory over the lower realms of matter, once more the springtime of a new life, with the promise of life, light, and love. The sign Aries represents the thinking powers of humanity. In short, the active, intellectual being, the Lord of material creation, man, and in its cosmic relations, as shown under the occult application of the 12 signs, Volume 1, we find the same perfect analogy. 2. Taurus. He, Aries, turns and wonders at the mighty bull, Taurus. The second constellation of the shining 12 represents the first reaction of spiritual conception. In other words, it is the mind's attention to its own ideas. In the Kabbalah, it represents that peculiar state of executive force whereof it is symbolically said, "And the Lord saw that it was good," after each act of creation. When intelligence first manifests itself, form is a matter of necessity, and, as no form can possibly exist without matter, so Taurus is the first emanation of matter in its most etherealized state. Hence it is feminine, Venus the ruler thereof, and it represents the first pure form of the human soul as it existed in its bright paradise within the angelic spheres of its parents, and reveals to us the first surprise of intelligence in embryo, the first sensation of consciousness, so to say, conscious of its divine selfhood. Hence, he, the male spirit of pure fire, Aries, glorious in his golden, solar wool, turns, expressing reaction, and wonders at the mighty bull, or material form. Thus, the first idea of pure intelligence in embryo, the result of action in Aries, becomes objective to its consciousness and is surprised at its own conception. It is the first sensation of pure, divine love within angelic realms, and it, the male spirit of pure fire, sees that it is good. Bringing this spiritual reality within our conception and comparing it with its reflected astrological influx, what a beautiful harmony we find, and yet so simple that verily we cannot refrain from once more quoting our old time-worn, yet nevertheless golden law: as it is above, so it is below; as on the earth, so in the sky. Reflecting that Taurus is an earthly sign and a symbol of servitude, we see that matter is ever the servant of spirit, a necessary means for the manifestation of intelligence, again recognized in the fecundating forces of this astrological sign on every plane of its action. And it is ruled by Venus, the love element in nature, her sympathies ever finding expression in this beautiful sign. What can be clearer, more understandable than that the involved principles and deific attributes, as represented by the shining constellations, when refracted through the human organism, so complex in its constitution, reflects qualities which are the external and parallel expression of the subjective principles, and further, That form is absolutely necessary for the manifestation of intelligence. 3. Gemini. He, Taurus, bending lies with threatening bead and calls the twins Gemini to rise. They clasp for fear and mutually embrace. This bright constellation, Castor and Pollux, Gemini is spiritually representative of the second spiritual action. Hence, it is, of course, a masculine sign and positive. We have witnessed Act 1 of the soul's drama, and as some have said, tragedy, and in this, the third of the Shining 12, we find the opening scene of Act 2, viz., the evolution of the twin souls, or more correctly, the differentiation of the divine soul into its two natural component parts, male and female. Here we approach one of the most arcane secrets within the wide scope of occult philosophy, hence must be exact and at the same time clear in our statements. Note then that after the male spirit of pure ethereal divine fire, Aries, bad conceived the first idea, and Taurus, the material envelope, had given that idea objective existence to its, the ego's, consciousness, we find sensation as the result. No sooner sensation than aspiration, longing. This closes the action and the reaction. Ever in obedience to the unsatisfied wants of an immortal soul, nature immediately responds. Hence, he bending lies with threatening head, that is demanding, and calls the twin souls to rise, to appear or evolve forth, and as a first rude shock caused by their separation, or rather by their separate existence, as two distinct yet mutually dependent forces, we have the context. They clasp for fear and mutually embrace. This most impressive scene in the soul's drama is one of profound interest and sublime beauty. In the Kabbalah, we find the same parallel, wherein it is stated, "And so God created man in his own image," the action of Aries and Taurus. In his own image, mind, created he him, male and female, created he them. In other words, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini are thus spoken of in pure allegory. The mundane Bible of the Jews, like everything else esteemed sacred, finds its original and perfect expression in the great astral Bible of the skies. To the average student, the evolution of the twin souls is a profound mystery, embracing, as it does, the whole of involution and evolution, seeing that this beautiful constellation represents to us the first recognition or consciousness of the divine ego, of its dual forces, sensation and aspiration, called forth by the action of Aries and Taurus. How beautifully has the poet expressed this first pulsation of divine love. They clasp for fear, etc., evolved by the divine will of pure intelligence. They must ever remain as separate, yet mutually dependent forces, positive and negative, male and female, upon whose action and reaction rests the perfect evolvement of the powers and possibilities of the One. In order to clearly grasp the whole of these ramifications, we again invite our students' careful attention to the same sign, Gemini, in its astrological aspect, as it is representatively expressed by refraction upon the human organism. We find that this sign, the representative of the constellation always, signifies the union of reason with intuition, and that it governs the arms, hands, and executive forces of man. Surely, as we reflect upon the almost marvelous interrelationship between things spiritual and things temporal, we must conclude with the man Jesus that they have eyes, but they see not, and ears, but alas, they hear not. If it were not so, man would, indeed, by virtue of the latent forces within him, take the kingdom of heaven by storm, and reign supreme as enthroned king of all material forms. Man, in his blindness, has relegated intuition to obscurity, has neglected the cunning of the left hand, and debauch the pure love of the divine state. Consequently, the executive forces within him are unbalanced, thus rendering him the slave of material forms instead of being their lawful sovereign. Therefore, not until with clean hands and pure heart he restores intuition to her throne, united with reason, can he hope to comprehend the reality of this arcane mystery of the twin souls, Gemini. 4. Cancer. And next, the twins with an unsteady pace, bright Cancer rolls. In this beautiful constellation, we witness the reaction of Gemini, the closing scene in Act 2. Hence, it is of course a feminine force we are observing. In other words, it is that period, or rather one of them, wherein the Kabbalah expresses the reaction of the In Sof via his creators as, and behold, the Lord saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Just so Cancer, spiritually interpreted, means equalizing, hence harmony, which is indeed very good, as contradistinguished from chaos. To the human soul, Cancer is the period of exalted rest. It is the highest point in the arc of the divine soul's angelic cycle. From this glorious but subjective summit or altitude in the realm of spirit, it must descend. Restless energy and the still unsatisfied longings of its own immortal nature are the forces that bring such evolution about. Having evolved the dual forces of its divine nature, the ego sees that it is good and rests from its labor. But as this exalted state is purely subjective and ideal, it must, of necessity, to satisfy the longing for further unfoldment and desire to know, descend into material realms and conditions. From this point begins the soul's involution downward until the lowest point in the arc is reached, viz., Capricorn. Refer now to the sign Cancer and carefully study out the parallel upon its astrological planes and also under its occult aspects as given forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, where we read, Cancer rules the respiratory and digestive functions of humanity and governs the reflective organs of the brain. Note the parallel. Within subjective realms, the divine soul has inspired and assimilated all that is possible to that angelic state and knows a period of blissful rest, but the longings of its immortal nature urge on the soul. So we see that the sign Cancer symbolizes tenacity to life. To live, we must breathe and eat and assimilate upon every plane of our being. It necessarily follows that the mentality expressed by Cancer must be susceptible to inspirational currents. To inspire is to indraw. In its application, we find that this sign symbolizes love. How beautiful the harmony and contrast of the constellation and its astrological representative. 4. Leo. Then Leo shakes his mane. Herein is typified the third grand spiritual action, which, as we find throughout nature, travel in pairs. Hence, Leo is a positive, masculine constellation. Having attained the highest point in the super celestial states of subjective embryonic existence, having evolved sensation and aspiration, now inspired by a desire for immortality, the dual soul of the divine ego is once more impelled forward. But as all evolution works in spirals, it cannot ascend higher without first apparently descending lower. So ever onward in its eternal march. This beautiful constellation symbolizes the first action on the downward portion of the arc. It is the affinities of the heart, so to say, working from within to without. Matter, in its most etherealized form, begins to assert its sway. The allegorical serpent of Eden is working upon the feminine portion, symbolized by the heart, and like a magnetic tractor, the soul's affinities are drawn downward, and, as if in defiance of all responsibilities, consequences, and karma, the soul, lion-like, shakes his mane in the imperiousness of deathless courage. As we read these weird allegories written by deity in the starry vaults of heaven, the interested soul bows in reverence and awe before that almighty power we term Providence, and the profane call God. No man has altered these pure records of divinity. No finger has interpolated one single line. They are as beautifully clear to the soul now as they were in the very dawn of nature's awful creation. To the initiate into Uranus mysteries, it is unnecessary to draw a parallel between the constellation and its astrological sign. They are too clear, magnificent, and impressive to escape notice. To the majority of students, the resemblance may not be so apparent. Hence, for their benefit, we will point out a few aspects of this interesting parallel. We read that the sign Leo is the solar lion of the mysteries that ripens with his own internal heart the fruits brought forth from the earth by the moisture of Isis, the soul. Just so, the divine ego, by its eternal energy and strength, the pure fire of intelligence, externalizes through material forms the principles involved in the downward portion of the arc, as qualities and attributes of the soul, reflected in the physical man as traits and qualities. Again, we are told, this sign reveals to us the ancient sacrifice and the laws of its compensation. In the imperiousness of a deathless courage, the soul defies all consequences and responsibilities. Surely, this is the supreme sacrifice, to leave its pure Edenic state to gain knowledge, to evolve its latent forces. And from this lion of the tribe of Judah is born that divine love and sympathy, which ultimately redeems and purifies the soul and saves it from death in matter. The laws of its compensation are fulfilled in the perfected man. In its intellectual aspect, we learn that the mental forces of those dominated by this sign are ever striving to attain unto some higher state. Their ideas are grand compared with the nature of the constellation and all that it implies. The reflection is clear, natural, and beautiful. When we reflect upon this awful period in the involution of the dual souls of the divine ego, as symbolized by the constellation, and the grand truths represented by the astrological sign, when refracted through the human organism, the reason for Leo being named the royal sign becomes quite plain. 6. Virgo. And following, Virgo calms his rage again. Beautifully expressive are these lines to those who read their mystic import aright. Virgo is the reaction of the leonine force and is, consequently, a feminine symbol. Action and reaction are the eternal laws upon which the cosmos is founded. They constitute the inseparable affinities, attraction, and repulsion of everything within the realm of manifested being. In this mystic constellation, we see the first ideas of maternal instinct arise. This is a necessary result of the impulsive action of the heart in Leo, the reaction from a state of imperious defiance. The heat of rage or energy and deathless courage results in the ideas of something to be encountered, overcome, and of self-preservation. The dual soul descends still another volve in the spiral of its celestial journey toward crystallized forms. Virgo, the virgin of the skies and eternal symbol of that divine, immaculate conception, shows wherein these forces lie. Here is conceived in a pure, holy sense the first instinct of love within the dual soul. It represents that awful period in the biblical Garden of Eden wherein the virgin wife stands before the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where she is fascinated by the allurements of matter, and is unconsciously becoming enveloped in the coils of the serpent. In other words, after the cosmic force had shaken its mane in defiance of material forces, it is the reaction of his subjective half, which sees how good material things are, or, in other words, and following Virgo, calms his rage again. The masculine half, or positive force of the soul, yields to temptation and is soothed by the alluring prospects. It will be noticed in this connection that pity, reflection, and compassion are the peculiar actions of the sign Virgo in the zodiac, not the constellation, and that astrologically it governs the bowels. This symbolism is really very beautiful when closely compared and studied. That immaculate conception of pure love of the soul for its other half upon the astrological plane becomes refracted and reacts as compassion and pity. Again, the soul, within subjective realms, sees how good material things are, and its refraction represents the assimilating functions of the human organism. It also reveals to us the significance of the Lord's Supper. At this stage of its journey, the divine ego knows for the last time that close communion with the twin soul before the crucifixion, the wine typical of the sacrifice, the bread, and the sustaining forces of its own immortal being. The intellectual aspect of the sign Virgo forms a perfect analogy to the constellation and is too evident for further remarks. 7. Libra. Then day and night are weighed in Libra's scales, equal a while, at last the night prevails. Another volve in the spiral, and we reach the grand climax of the soul's journey within the spiritual world. The nature of this constellation was, for ages, concealed from all but initiates, for the reason that it contains the most important mysteries connected with the human soul. It is the grand transition and between the spiritual world and the astral world. In other words, between ideal conceptions and elemental forms, between the world of design and the realms of force. One of the chief mysteries of Libra is that it is androgyny, or bisexual in nature. So far, the dual soul has evolved within the realms of spirituality. Here it stands in the celestial balance between the two, giving way to temptation, takes the forbidden fruit, and instantly awakes from its purely spiritual state to become surrounded by the illusions of matter. The struggle of the soul with the attracting forces of matter is very clearly expressed in the line, equal a while, at last the night prevails. In other words, astral and physical darkness bedim the soul's spiritual sight, and leaving the realms of innocence and bliss, they sink into the vortex of the great astral world. The celestial state is now forever lost as a realm of angelic innocence. It can only be regained amid trial, sorrow, suffering, and experience, and when regained, it is as Lord and Master, not as the innocent cherub. But when, having gained or reached the equator of the upward arc of its progress, and, united once more to its missing half, gives expression to that deathless force with which it started from the opposite point, Aries, I am that I am, no longer an embryo, but being within the universal soul of being. Before closing this symbolic constellation, we must reveal the mystery of its bisexual nature. In the higher or first portion of the sign, it is positive to some extent and masculine. The soul is still within the Garden of Eden and pure, clad in the raiment of God, and is represented by the Chaldean statues of the bearded Venus, or Venus, the angel of Libra, as a morning star bright Lucifer. But in the latter half, after the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, positive and negative, you see, has been partaken of, bright Lucifer falls. The son of the morning, shorn of his glory, becomes the symbol of night or vesper, the evening star, and the symbol is thus, and the soul loses its heavenly raiment, or spiritual consciousness, and becomes clothed with matter, the symbol of night. The sign Libra in the zodiac, in its astrological aspect, is a very external correspondence of all the foregoing. 8. Scorpio. And longer grown, the heavier scale inclines and draws bright Scorpio from the winter signs. We now behold the gates of paradise guarded by the flaming sword, which points to the four quarters of the world. This sword is, according to Genesis, to guard the way of the tree of life, and such, esoterically, it really is. The soul is no longer dual, but separated into male and female personalities, and behold, they see that they are naked. Stripped of their spiritual raiment, they feel the chill of matter and the lusts of an animal nature. They need clothing, so God made them coats of skin. Sex is the symbolism herein typified, and the evolution of the animal passions of procreation, of multiplication and evolution. It is the complete entry of the soul into elemental conditions, and the flaming sword guarding the four quarters of the earth to the way of life are the four general realms of the astral world. The way to physical life in concrete forms, and the way to life eternal through the realms of the sylphs, gnomes, undines, and salamanders. They are the basis of all matter, known as air, earth, water, and fire. Here we see that through the evolution of sex and its accompanying desire for procreation, these blind forces of nature find their avenue of expression. Spiritual consciousness almost lost, and without reason, the soul becomes the prey, so to say, of these forces of the astral world, which is the realm of design. The soul's creations must be met and vanquished upon the upward arc of the cycle of progress. They guard or oppose the way to eternal life. Here the soul, having gained the victory, stripped forever of its earthly raiment and the lusts of the flesh, arrayed once more in its spiritual raiment, purified and sanctified, it will stand once more at the gates of paradise, where, reunited with its missing half, it will partake of the fruit of the tree of life and become as gods. Astrologically, the correspondence is perfect, and so thinly disguised as to need no explanation. 9. Sagittarius. Him Centaur follows with an aiming eye, his bow full drawn and ready to let fly. Deeper and deeper sinks the soul into material forms. The evolution of sex has produced the necessary avenues for the entrance of countless forces, and the soul is now rapidly losing the last vestiges of its spiritual conscience. In other words, Sagittarius symbolizes that state of the soul wherein it is descending to its polarizing point, and is, therefore, the vortex of innumerable opposing forces, seeking expression in different forms. It is the bow, strength or force of the soul, full drawn and ready to let fly its arrows of energy in any direction that may afford proper opportunity. Here we see the expression of that deathless, fiery force and imperious daring and courage within more material states, the primal fire reflected from another angle. But everything is unsettled. It is a masculine force and restless, and is represented under the allegory of the Tower of Babel and the utter dispersion of the people. entities to the four corners of the earth, and finally becomes involved in dense matter, and its migrations are at an end on this side of the cycle of necessity. Upon the astrological plane, the zodiacal sign Sagittarius rules the motive forces and the pedestrian instinct, the thighs, or basis of locomotion. Hence, we see, even here, a most perfect analogy. This sign symbolizes also the governing forces of humanity, which see the necessity of law and order, hence, government. In this expression, we find the bow, strength or force, ready to let fly its arrows of energy in any direction the opportunity may afford. When refracted upon the human organism and reflected upon the external plane, these forces manifest as the restless spirit that ever impels onward, seeking new fields of expression, out of which develops a sense of order, restraining and training, or the governing of self and control of others. When we reflect upon these symbols of starry truths, the mind bows in reverence before the wisdom that created them. 10. Capricorn. Next, narrow horns the twisted caper shows. The goat, and in the realms of spirit, the crystallized mineral, is the reaction of the former, and shows to us death, inertia, and rest. Hence, Kronos, or Saturn, the symbol of death, is lord of this state and condition. It is the polarizing point of the soul's evolution in matter, and therefore forms the lowest arc in the cycle of necessity. Herein we behold the soul imprisoned within the mineral state. The fire of the flint and the spark in the crystal are the only avenues of its lonesome expressions. But as the lowest point, it is also the promise of a higher, and the symbol of a higher state, and the symbol of another spiral in its endless life. This constellation, as the symbol of inertia and death, is also the symbol of awakening life, and prepares the soul for the most perfect expression of its powers in its forthcoming upward journey. If we pause for a moment and consider the force and power necessary to evolve out of this dark, dense mineral realm, the foregoing sentence will become clear and forcible. Hitherto, the soul has been slowly drawn down into coils of matter, imprisoned by material forces. It has penetrated the lower depths and can go no farther. Rest here is to gather strength, force. Mark well the differences and parallel between Cancer and Capricorn, opposite points in the arc. Cancer is the symbol of exalted rest within angelic realms, Capricorn the symbol of rest in dense matter. From the former state, the soul is impelled forward on its downward journey. From the latter state, the soul awakens to the struggle for life on the upward arc, and must now give expression to the positive powers of its immortal being, which have become involved in material form, that shall make it the master and give it the victory over death and material forces. Surely this is truly the promise of a new day and higher state of existence. It will be instructive to study this by a comparison of the zodiacal sign Capricorn as set forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, wherein we read, "This sign signifies the knees, and represents the first principle in the trinity of locomotion, viz., the joints, bending, pliable, movable." It will be instructive to study this by a comparison of the zodiacal sign Capricorn as set forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, wherein we read, "This sign signifies the knees, and represents the first principle in the trinity of locomotion, viz., the joints, bending, pliable, movable." The analogy is perfect. The soul, which has been pliant, bending to material forces, now reverses this action and bows the knee in awe and reverence to the higher powers of its being. When refracted upon the human organism, we find that the cold, lonesome state and weary struggle within the mineral realm becomes love of self, directing its energies to the attainment of selfish ends. What could be more natural? 11. Aquarius. And from Aquarius, a flood o'erflows. The soul, released from its crystallized cycle of matter, now rapidly evolves into states, though material, yet entirely different. Its previous arc, from Libra to Capricorn, has been amid inorganic matter. It is now rushing with lightning speed upon its weird, toilsome upward journey through purely organic forms, from vegetable to animal. And as all organic forms have their primary origin in water, so does this celestial urn express the primary conception of this physical state. Further, to more fully express this, Aquarius is typical of man as prototype of the last grand goal of the soul's future material state. In other words, the last quadrant of the four elements, viz., bull, lion, eagle, man. There is something exceedingly significant in all this, and the more we ponder on this spiritual allegory of the shining constellation, the more we are impressed with the divine wisdom of those early instructors of our race, who thus preserve truth in an incorruptible form. From this weird but beautiful constellation, we learn how the soul has progressed, finding innumerable avenues of expression of its latent forces, the manifestation of its powers in the various chemical changes and development of functions expressed through countless forms on the lower planes of existence, the sacrifice of its angelic innocence, the imperious defiance and deathless courage symbolized by Leo, have obtained the victory over the lower kingdoms, which will be incorporated into his vast empire. Yet, unstable as water, it cannot excel, or in other words, cannot rise to a higher state within this arc of its progressive life. We find that the astrological expression of this constellation, the sign Aquarius, governs the legs and is the natural emblem of the changeable, movable, migratory forces of the body, forming a perfect parallel with its interior symbol. There is a great deal contained in the zodiacal sign worthy of deep study and reflection. 12. Pisces. Near their loved waves, cold Pisces take their seat, with Aries join and make the round complete. Once more a reaction, the last scene of the soul's impersonal drama. The constellation, if Pisces is the symbol of rest and expectation, the soul has now completed the first round or rung in the cycle of necessity, and its next state is that of incarnated man. It has triumphed over every sphere below, and defied, in turn, every power above, and is now within that sixth state of the embryonic soul world that transforms all its past knowledge, sorrow, and suffering into experience and produces the impersonal man. It has traveled through constellated states within matter and spirit, and as a human soul with reason, intuition, and responsibility, it will, in its next state, become subject to those same powers when reflected from a different plane. The 12 constellations of its soul will manifest a complete rapport with the 12 signs of solar light and power. With this we close. The mystic sign of this constellation is, or completion, a seal and a sign of its past labors. And, as we have seen, the shining constellations are the soul's progressive history from its genesis to its appearance within embodied conditions as man. And so, by correspondence, are the 12 solar signs, symbols of man and his material destiny. The foundation has been laid, the material and resources are at hand, for his kingdom is exclusive. With his own hands he must build his temple, the symbol of the perfected man. Each stone accurately measured, cut, polished, and in its proper place, the proportions asymmetrical, hence harmonious, the keystone of whose arch is will, its foundation love. This accomplished, he will have completed the second round of the great cycle of necessity. And who, after contemplating the wondrous harmony of this beautiful system, and the complete accord of each part, can refuse to agree with the truly inspired Addison, that ever moving as they shine, the hand that made us is divine. End of section 3.